Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and this is going to be another Warcry Warband review, this time breaking away from the chaosy, 8 points warbands like the Corvus Cabal. And I'm going to talk about a warband that is also near and dear to me as I'm going through the initial, warbands that matter, at least to me, of course. And that's the Bonesplitterz, because this is my Age of Sigmar army whenever I get a chance to play. They are wild and super fun in AOS. So in this video, we're going to talk about starting to play them. We're going to review the characters in an abbreviated fashion. I'll get to that in a minute. And just kind of ask the questions, what is it good at, what is it bad at, and who is this faction for? But first, a brief backstory on the Bonesplitterz as we dive into basically what are they trying to translate from lore to the tabletop. The Bonesplitterz are essentially a sub-faction of orcs that exist in the mortal realms, where when orcs get into battle, they get this like WAAAGH fever. It's just this frenzied energy that permeates throughout all of them collectively. And normally for orcs, when the battle dies down and everything's been won, they tend to chill out, and that's when they become kind of the more comical side of orcs that we understand. But for some of these orcs, something goes wrong, whether it was a smack to the head or, particularly psychic energies or something. There's not really quite known, but some orcs get stuck in that WAAAGH craziness. They become like frothing mad with battle rage. So the rest of the orc clans kick them out because it's like, you're being weird, get out of here. By some unknown means, these orcs who are all crazy tend to congregate together. They kind of just drift away from their previous war clans together and follow a WAAAGH prophet, essentially a crazy orc who can divine the will of Gorkamorka, according to him, and not so much lead these mad orcs, but more direct them. So there's elements of zealotry and like just kind of indoctrination and control, but also just madness and manic energy. And the WAAAGH prophets essentially point them towards the largest, biggest beasts in the mortal realms and say, it is Gorkamorka's will that we kill that beast. This is a hunting focused warband, although they will fight literally anything that comes near them. Again, they're stuck in battle mode, so anything they see is fair game. But the prophet is trying to direct them to beasts because within their kind of religious philosophy, to break open the bones of a great beast is to release Gur energy into the realms and just kind of becomes more bestial, and eventually that will herald the return of Gorkamorka. How that plays on, in terms of table format, we're generally talking about swift moving, very lightly armored orcs that are all about melee aggression for the most part. There are some other options, but a lot of melee aggression, and then also heroes that have a massive difference on the battlefield because they're kind of directing and controlling the flow of all of these psychopathic orcs. One side note to add to the lore, they actually ride boars, which is very prominent in their army list, and the reason they do that is because boar meat tastes terrible. So it's just a creature that they've learned to coexist and kind of use for cavalry that they just don't like the taste of. So with the backstory done, kind of the lore behind this little faction, let's talk about the actual warband itself. How is that communicated to the tabletop? We're going to be in that discussion real quick. Before then, I just wanted to give a shout out to Not Just Gaming, a fantastic store over on the East Coast that is a personal friend of the show, and is just, the guy's awesome. And so it's a family run business, and they pass on a 30% discount to all Games Workshop products. If you are looking to add anything to your Warcry collection, if you wouldn't mind, please use the link down below. It saves you money and goes a long way to supporting me, my wife, our cats, this channel, all of it. Thank you so much to everyone who has already used it. It means the world. So back at it, let's start talking rules, right? Bring it to the table. We'll go over to the shared screen here. I'll tell you what, I'll throw my mug there in the bottom for you. And we're going to be just kind of relaxed and chatting about this. So if you got some paint and brushes and models, bring them out. Let's just have a hangout and talk about Bonesplitterz in Warcry. Now, the way I like to start these is talking about the universal abilities that everybody has access to, right? Because that kind of sets the tone for what anyone can do at any given time. So we'll talk about the universal abilities, get into the individual fighter cards, and then we'll address what abilities they have as they come up. So we'll start off with the reaction that anyone can do. Get stuck in. A fighter can make this reaction after an enemy fighter finishes a move action visible to this fighter and within 3 inches of this fighter. I'm going to pause right there. So if an enemy moves within 3 inches of you, you can do this ability. That's important. Pick another friendly fighter within 3 inches of this fighter. Okay, so you pick a buddy who the person didn't move that close towards, presumably. And that fighter makes a bonus move action. After that move action, that fighter must be within 1 inch of the enemy fighter that made the move action. So what this is allowing you to do is essentially take someone who's behind you and bring them forward. And so now you've switched the math from a 1 versus 1 kind of fight to a 2v1. And in a game where it's all about trading your pieces, meaning your cheap chumps, you know, kind of act as a screen to your heavy hitters come in and then take out presumably your enemy's heavy hitters. This is a way to swing math in a very convenient way. It also makes me want to use the buddy system for any orc. If your opponent is moving to kill, say, Orc A, they move within 3 inches. Orc A triggers this ability, uses a reaction. Now Orc B comes over and is engaging. Now that original player has to either keep, you know, attack Orc A like he wanted to, or this new target that maybe he wasn't prepared for. Regardless, when his activation ends, one of those two is probably still going to be alive, and they can now in combat just attack, massive damage out. Again, it just swings the map and pins down an enemy. I like it a lot. It requires a little bit of thought, but I do like it. The next universe ability is Charge, and this is quite frankly one of my favorite rules that exists in Warcry. A fighter can only use this ability if there is a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of them. Cool. This fighter makes a bonus move action and must finish closer to the closest visible enemy fighter than when they were at the start of the move action. So what this means is, even if you are not in combat, if an enemy ever ends within 6 inches of you and is visible, that's an important thing, you can get a free action when you activate that model. Use this first, get your free movement, and then you can attack. You don't have to waste an action on moving. But I love Charge. It's just the free motion just makes, there's a 6-inch bubble of danger around any one of your orcs, and that's a good thing. And the last one here is their Quad, which is rampaging destroyers. Until the end of this fighter's activation, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of attack actions made by this fighter. Awesome. In addition, until the end of this fighter's activation, after an enemy fighter is taken down by an attack action made by this fighter makes a bonus move action. So you essentially get the ability to ping pong up the board, provided that you can keep attacking. So if you started, you would prompt this first, right? So you get your extra attack, kill somebody, hopefully, right? Get a bonus move into your next target, and then you would hopefully kill them with your second action, your second attack action. And then from there you would get a free move to either move towards an objective, the next enemy, out of combat, whatever you want to do. Of course, at that point you've already spent your 2 actions, nothing else you can do, but it does give you a cool chance to do a lot of movement. Now I want to split this next part up into 2 different sections because Bonesplitterz have so many quote-unquote options within their roster. There's a lot of cards, entries rather, for all the various types of Bonesplitterz, but really here's what it comes down to. There's 2 kits that make up the overwhelming majority of this faction, and indeed the Age of Sigmar army faction as well. That's the Bonesplitterz on foot and riding boar. Their profiles in Warcry are not terribly dissimilar, so what I'm going to do is basically split this into a review of the unique leaders like Savage Big Boss, Prophet, Wardock, that kind of thing. And then separately, I'm going to kind of catch all when it comes to the various types of Bonesplitterz for brevity's sake, because honestly, they're not vastly different. So let's kick off their discussion with heroes by talking about the Savage Big Boss. He clocks in at 185 points, which is not bad for a hero unit. Movement value of 4, so he again is not terribly fast, but with all the ways to get extra movement in this faction, that's not the worst thing. Toughness 4, which is wonderful for a hero. I mean, it could be better, of course, anything could be, but toughness 4 is not what I expected on these guys. Usually they're toughness 3, or whatever the weakest version of a thing is. In most games, that's what Savage Orcs are depicted as. But a wound pool of 25, which is nice. I do like anything above 20. I'm just like, that's real good. His weapon here is a giant axe. It is a 1-inch ranged weapon. Has 3 attacks at strength 5, which is terrific, so he is a big hitter, and his damage profile is 3 wounds on the hit and 6 on the crit. That is a wonderful melee hero. Now we'll scroll up and take a look at his abilities. Anything that has any form of leader role is going to be able to access the WAAAGH. So all these options, until I say otherwise, can do this. Spend a triple and WAAAGH until the end of the battle round. Add half the value of this ability, rounding up, to the move characteristic of friendly fighters while they make a move action that starts within 6 inches of this fighter. So you could have him go first, activate this ability and then wait, get all your other activations out of the way, surge your guys forward, and then the boss can follow up after them. That's definitely an option you got, but it's a movement buff essentially for all of the Bonesplitterz, which is fitting. Their thing is really about speed and aggressive play rather than maybe tactical genius. But the big boss also has access to a unique one called the Mighty WAAAGH. So all leaders can do the move a little bit, you know, whatever half the value of the dice is. The Mighty WAAAGH is until the end of the battle round, add 3 to the movement characteristic of fighters while they make a move action that starts within 9 inches of this model. So not only does it make the bubble bigger, but it's also a more dependable amount of additional speed. And what's interesting is it's changing the characteristic, not just adding 3 inches, so that's cool. It's a good ability, especially in a game where you need to move to get objectives. Any twist card that mitigates speed, there's ones that slow you down if you're on the floor of the battlefield. Those are great. This is great for countering that, because if it hurts your opponent more than you, you're in a good place. Next is my boy, the WAAAGH Prophet, one of my favorite models in Age of Sigmar. Let's see how they translated him. Clocks in at 155 points, so cheaper, which is interesting, because in AOS he's way better and stronger. These two are inverted. He has a ranged attack option, which is starts at 3 inches, goes up to 7. Okay. 2 attacks on that one, strength 3, and then his damage profile is 3 wounds for a hit and 6 wounds for a crit. So you are fishing for crits there. You're not going to be doing a ton of wounds with a strength 2 thing, but that's okay. He's typically not seen as like a combat character. He does have a melee attack though. It has a range 2 and 3 attacks, strength 4, and this does a very basic 1 damage on the hit, 4 on the crit, which is pretty much a profile that like the lowest level chumps have. So, I mean, between the two, I'd rather be fishing for crits, to be honest with you, because that would be just smarter, I think. Movement speed of 4, toughness 4, which is cool, and 22 wounds in his health pool. But let's take a look at his ability here. He can, of course, do the wall like everybody else. What else has he got? He has the Beast Mask Dance. It's a triple, and so until the end of the battle round, subtract 1 from the attack's characteristic of attack actions made by enemy fighters while they're within 6 inches of this fighter. Simply put, he's a debuff piece that has a ranged attack. Not my fave. I would, between the two of these, definitely go after the Savage Big Boss first in terms of my priority for choosing. -1 attack is good, especially in missions where you have to protect something. Like, there's uses for him, but it's just not my fave. Next up is the WAAAGH, who also clocks in at 155, so it's going to be a different kind of wizard, which is how they approached this in Warcry. He has pretty much the exact same profile. His melee weapon is strength 3 instead of strength 4, and the damage on his melee is 1 on a hit and 3 on a crit, but like those profiles are very, very similar. Both movement and toughness 4, coming in at 22 wounds. Like, they pretty much more on par with each other, whereas in AOS there's a gulf between the two of them. Let's go up here to the WAAAGH's ability. You have the Flaming Skull thing. Ritual Dance. Remove up to D3 damage points allocated to each friendly fighter within 6 inches of this fighter. Roll for each of them. I like this much more than the debuff, the Beast Mask Dance. I like being able to just count on my fighters to do things, get them back in there, and when you can have people in the back line that your reaction is primed and ready for, meaning they're about to move up into the front, having them back there to get healing and stuff is nice. And last one here for the special heroes is the Maniac Weird Knob. This is essentially a crazy shaman who's riding a boar. Comes in at 222 points, our most expensive option so far, and that's because of their mount, really. They are a mounted leader. They have a ranged attack. It's just like everybody else's, 3 to 7 inch range, 2 attacks, strength 3 for his, which is cool, and then 3 on the hit, 6 on the crit when it hits somebody. The melee attack is 2 inch range, and that's I assume because of the boar. 4 attacks, 4 strength, and then it's 1s and 4s when it comes to hits and crits. Now, they do get a bunch of extra things because they are riding a mount. We'll talk about those. Movement 10. So think about what you can do with that. You can have him pretty much anywhere you want. He is a leader, so he can use the WAAAGH ability in addition to that. And then we'll go into his various things, because we're going to talk about the cavalry abilities that they all have access to with him, and then we'll talk about his particular leader thing as well. So up here we have the Weird Squig, which is his unique thing that he's got. Until the end of this fighter's activation, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of missile attacks made by this fighter. That's fine if you know that you're going to just be having him hold back and firing from a distance. and that's kind of what you're using him for. In that given turn, it's fine. It only costs a double. It's easy to get, so it's like a why not thing. I wouldn't count on it, but I like it. I mean, as far as like leaders that are going to stand back and pelt from a distance, it's not bad. Now, because he is riding the mount, he has these two icons as well, and he can spend a triple for the Tusker Charge. Until the end of this fighter's activation, the next time this fighter finishes a move action within 1 inch of an enemy fighter, pick an enemy fighter in 1 inch of this fighter, allocate a number of wounds to that fighter to the value of this ability. So if you use double 4s and you end your move within 1 inch, all of a sudden the guy takes 4 damage. I like this ability, and we're going to get into some of the boar boys that I think it really works well with. For him, though, with his ability to want to stand back and shoot more, the two don't really go together. His biggest asset is his ability to be a hero, a leader, who can move a lot. So in missions where they have to either kill your leader or your leader has to do a thing, it gets very useful in a tactical sense. Now on this page, I just want to show off one more time. So now we move into the second part where I mentioned the various kits that go together to make this thing. Essentially, there's 2 units that can come out of the Boar Rider kit. There's the Boar Boys and the Maniac Boar Boys, which is sort of the basic and elite versions of those infantry respectively. And then for the infantry kit, they have a few different options. They can be arrow boys, firing range attacks. They can be basic crazy orcs, or savage orcs rather, so your basic infantry with sword or spear. You could also be more boys, which are the elite infantry, where they're just double hand weapons that typically focus more on aggression than defense. Each of these all comes with their own hero options. As you can see here, we have the savage orc boss with chomp and bone shield. There's a maniac boar rider. There's all the different ones. All it does is give them the leader keyword and any relevant skills we're going to cover in their generic version. Just know that they exist. If you want to use one of these lesser characters as your boss, go for it. And as promised, so that nobody falls asleep at the wheel and drives off a cliff, we're going to kind of lump all of their unit options loosely together. So for example, the Savage Boar Boy, which is your basic orc on a boar. Okay, they all have a very similar profile. They all gain access to the same Tusker Charge ability, where you can take the value of that ability and put it on an opponent if you end a movement charge within 1 inch. Basically, we're just going to go through the different profiles and talk about their various points cost. So the basic guy is 140 points. This is just if you have a chompo, just a basic hack and slash weapon. 10-inch move, again, just like the hero option, 4 toughness and 20 wounds. So he's a thick boy. He does, again, get the Tusker Charge, and for his attacks, he is looking at 1-inch range on his weapons, 4 attacks, strength 3, and then for the damage, it is 1 on a hit, 3 on a crit. So it really is a very, very cheap chump warrior just put on a faster chassis, so to speak. His spear version is exactly the same, except it trades in the weapon. Now it's a 2-inch ranged weapon with only 3 attacks, so you trade in a little bit of attack power. Still strength 3, but the difference is it's 1 damage on a hit and 4 on a crit. So if you're just fishing for crits, that's all you want to do with these guys, the spear guy is an option for you. And it also is 140 points. Next is the Savage Boar Boy with the Totem. So this is like their banner bearer type thing. He gains access to a unique ability. So he can do the Tusker Charge. He can also do another one, which we'll review here in a second. His attack profile is he has a 3-inch ranged weapon because the thing is so tall. 3 attacks, strength 5, so that's a good swing on him. His hits are going to be 2 damage and his crits are going to be 4. That's not a bad profile at all. It does come at 195, so it's a little pricey here for not being a leader, but let's scroll up and see what that ability is. That is the Beast Spirit Juju. It is a double, so very reliable that you'll get it, or you can always make it if you want to. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the toughness characteristic of friendly fighters while they are within 6 inches of this fighter. That's a wonderful ability to use early so that your opponents, like, you move him into a position and then all the other orcs follow behind him, because now when they end their movement within such a distance, they're more tough. And then you can use things like reaction abilities to kind of block off lanes and that kind of deal. So that's a very interesting to me, like, in terms of the choices for you, because the majority of orcs that you're going to see on the table tend to be toughness 3. and so giving them toughness 4 in a given area is great. The last option from the Boar kit is the Savage Boar Boy Maniac, who is just the crazy elite rider one. He has 2 weapons and no really other options, and he is coming in at 185 points, but his profile is quite nice actually. It is, you're looking at 1-inch ranged weapons, 4 attacks, strength 4, so again 1 higher strength. That's great for clearing out chaff. Damage profile is 2 on the hit, 4 on the wound. I think it's a better choice than the other basic ones, specifically if you want a fighter to go move quickly and take out, you know, your opponent's cheap infantry option. This guy just wants to be in combat, and it's terrific. Now, this Savage Boar Boy ability, he has his own little icon here. Let's take that look at that. That is known as the Toof Shiv. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a dice on a 3-up. Allocate 3 damage to that fighter. I'm typically not a fan of abilities where you spend the dice and then have to roll a die, but if you're not going to be able to use Tusker Charge, if you're just trying to do more and more damage while you're already stuck in, it's not a bad idea. It's low on my list of priority uses for command dice or ability dice, but it's cool if you want to use it. Now we're going to move into talking about the options that come out of the basic infantry kit. I'm going to be very quick about these. There's a Savage Orc, Arrow Boy, and the Moor Boy. Let's get Arrow Boys out of the way. Clocking in at 110 points. 4-inch move, toughness 4, 15 wounds. That just means they're a little bit hardy, but do you need hardiness in an archer? I'm not sure. So, ranged attack, they are between 3 and 15 inches, which is a great range in my opinion. It's a lot of like good, I don't know, I wish more guns were that way, so like you had to move a little bit to get up there. 2 attacks, strength 3, hits do 1 damage, the crits do 3. Not terrible. They have access to an ability called Loads of Arrows. Let's take a look at that. We got here, it's a triple. Add half the value of this ability to the attack's characteristic of the next missile attack made by this fighter in this activation. So it's not your whole activation, it's just the next attack. So if you need to move, trigger the ability, and then attack, that's wonderful, but if you just attack, it doesn't affect both of them. I think because of that, the Arrow Boy is actually a usable piece in this army. He has some way to throw damage projection out there that isn't based on just movement. If you have a triple and you're looking to set up a Grand Slam, it's not a terrible idea. Now, if you were to take that same body and exchange the bow for the Banner Bearer ability, again, +1 toughness if you're within 6 inches of this model at any given time. I think it was a triple. Not a bad ability whatsoever. You just do that same thing, but you take him off a boar, put him on foot. That's what you get with the Totem Bearer. Clocks in at 115 points, and he has a very similar attack profile to the one on boar. 3-inch ranged, 3 attacks. This one's only strength 4, but it still does 2 on the hit and 4 on the crit. But the normal orc profile is a movement of 4, 3 toughness, and 15 wounds, so like it's much more brittle. The next I want to talk about is the Moor Boy. This is supposed to be the more attacky version of Bonesplitterz. Comes in at 95 points, 4-inch move, 3 toughness, 15 wounds. Again, basic orc stuff. 1-inch range on his attacks. He gets 3 of them. Strength 4, which is nice. The other ones are generally strength 3 on these little chump units. And then the damage is 2 on the hit and 4 on the crit. This is going to be your slightly more damage dealer, type unit, Spire Stalker equivalent in the Corvus Cabal. Your absolute cheapest unit is going to be the basic Savage Orc. Comes in 2 flavors. One of them has a Sticka and shield, and the other one has a Champa and shield. For this, they gain an extra toughness, so they each come in at 80 points. Movement 4, toughness 4, and then 15 wounds again. Get extra toughness from the shield, but they trade in some attack power for that. So the Spearman, 2-inch range on his, only 2 attacks, 3 on the strength there. For the damage, it's 1 to hit, 4 on the crit. And then, of course, for the one with the sword, you get a little bit more attacks, but they don't do quite as much damage on the crit. So 1-inch ranged, 3 attacks, 3 on the strength, 1 and 3 when it comes to hitting and critting. Other than that, they're identical, so kind of just take your flavor. Really, they exist to be a toughness 4, 15 wound wall, so that your better units, like your boars and that kind of stuff, can deliver damage through various abilities and attack. But I made you wait for desserts because the best unit is, of course, the Savage Big Stabbas. This is when 2 orcs get together and just carry a massive spear that could cut the very heavens themselves. This guy comes in at 165 points, no abilities whatsoever. 4-inch move, just like everybody else, 3 toughness, and it has 25 wounds, again, because now there's 2 orcs on there, and its attack profile is why it's significant. 2 inches on the range, 3 attacks at strength 5, again, fairly rare for this faction. The damage profile is 3 wounds on the hit, 6 on the crit. This is your right hook swing, and everything else is about delivering this to where it needs to be. His profile and the Savage Big Boss are certainly the scariest in this faction. There's a whole lot of 1 damage on the hit and 3 or 4 on the crit that is not backed up by a lot of good strength, meaning more hits are going to happen. So to have these 2 profiles in your list, I think are somewhat essential. How many of each is up to you and whatever kind of game you're playing in terms of what rule system you're using for narrative play or match play. But to me, I like. So let's come back here and ask the question, what does this warband do well, right? What does it do well? What does it do poorly? And then who is it for? Well, as far as what it does well, there's a lot of active, out of sequence movement stuff, whether it's the reaction pulling someone behind you forward to change the math on an encounter that your opponent wants to have, as well as the charge ability, spend 2 dice, get a free move, and then you can attack. That's wonderful. What a fantastic ability. But it's also coupled with a bunch of units that all kind of do the same thing in different ways, and none of them are like outstanding. We'll get to that when we talk about the cons. As far as pros go, I love the fact that even the base guy has 15 wounds. That can really stymie someone's charge when they start to trade pieces with the opponent. For example, like the difference between gore and ungore was significant because it's that little extra wounds that you have that it's just really hard to clean out in 1 round. One of the things that's nice is they are cost effective to do. If you were to buy 3 things, you would have any options that you kind of want for your Bonesplitterz, right? You buy a boar kit, a basic infantry kit, which can be just about all of those leader options, and then you pick 1 hero that you like. Personal suggestion is either the Savage Big Boss or the War Doc. They're also just really fun model kits. The Savage Big Boss is black. The fact that his pose is in so much motion and he gives motion benefits to all the fighters around him, it just looks fun. Now, as far as where it struggles, like I said, again, most of the faction is in those 2 kits. So if you don't like the aesthetic, that can also be a hindrance. The models can be very samey, not just aesthetically, but also what they do on the table. You're making very minute choices that may or may not matter. Like, you know, if you want a boar unit, might as well just go for the cheapest boar unit, because what you're really looking for is speed. If it's a fighter unit, you're really going to look at either a Moorboy or one with a Champa and a shield. And then arrow boys, I think, are more useful here than they are in AOS. So maybe building a couple, maybe just 3 max, might be good to have. It's really easy to get a ton of options though, so that's really nice for a faction. It's definitely one where this is not necessarily a con, but it could be when it comes to a learning curve for new players. Model placement is going to be massive, making sure that you are always in all of your ranges, because so many of their leader abilities are 6 or 9 inch auras. And then each individual model has a 3-inch aura where it can use the reaction to bring an ally forward, as well as if you can get a free movement, if the charge ability, you can get free movements to move there. So just thinking about the distances and the literal placement of your models is key to this faction. So as far as who is it's for, this is a very melee centric army, although you can bring an arrow boy, just 1, and just have him keep trying to use loads of arrows. That's totally reasonable. I don't think anything more than 1 is necessarily the best, but you're generally looking for very aggressive melee with a lot of key movements and buffs and auras to make that happen. There are probably other factions that do it much better. Things like the Iron Golems do really great when it comes to melee force, as well as a lot of the Khorne stuff. This is more about using movement with aggressive melee rather than just pure melee. So no, they're not the most effective. They're not the strongest. I don't necessarily recommend them for new players. I would probably recommend one of the Chaos Warbands, where it's kind of already designed with chumps and some more elite units kind of modeled differently to stand out more. But I do like all of the Bonesplitterz options, and they are my favorite AOS army, hands down. If you're looking to get in the game quickly and you want to spice up your gaming group by having, you know, some optional things to fight against, one of the things I've been working on is a solo play rule set for Warcry. I designed it initially a long time ago. I'm going to redo it for 2nd edition and put it out. And these make fantastic AI enemies, because you don't really have to care about them at all, right? They come in these very convenient batches. You can take a cheap leader just with one of the generic heroes, meaning like, a savage orc boss type thing, where it's just a lowest grade hero possible, build a cheap and simple warband, and get moving. Once again, if that's something that interests you and you're looking for a way to support the channel, please use that affiliate link down below. get yourself some Savage Orcs and start having a great time. I think they are a rewarding faction to play because of that rewarding system for choking up movement points, changing the math on engagements. I like when models move a lot. It's what draws me to them in AOS and also in Warcry. If there's a particular faction that you would like reviewed next, please like this video, leave it in the description down below, or not description, the comments down below, and I'm just going to use that for my next batch of these. And I'm very excited to talk about Warcry more and more. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.